Resilience research has been going on for decades and surged after World War II. With the focus on resilience after crises, we can better understand what makes us vulnerable or strong when faced with adversity. We have been deep in this global pandemic that has tested the resilience of all areas of our lives, from finances, relationships, health, coping, to even just facing ourselves. We have been confronted. There is no better time to midwife our sacred stories as anecdotal evidence to uncover resilience strategies in the studies of our lives. Storytelling transforms polarization to compassion. A story opens hearts, empowers, and inspires. It sparks hope and deepens wisdom. We are the hypothesis, the research, and the answer. Shared stories are the universal medicine in our journey toward collective optimal resilience. I bring to you the I Am Resilient podcast. The I Am Resilient podcast brings you stories of resilience, research, and insights from across the globe with the goal to educate people about resilience so that they can cultivate resilience consciously and overcome life's challenges to live with meaning, purpose, and strength. Welcome to the podcast. Why Resilience Matters and Essential Practices with Sarah Lambert. I was able to sit down with Sarah for this podcast, and I was blown away by her education, expertise, and experience on resilience. Take notes while you listen to this podcast because Sarah shares her incredible expertise and her beautiful practices of resilience, which she has completely dedicated herself to during her life as well as these times of adversity. As I said, Sarah is highly educated and experienced in her field of resilience. Her voice and offering is not only a gift, but an urgent message to all people during this time. She will be opening up a counseling practice and offering mindfulness groups, which will be a huge gift to this world. So I really hope you enjoy this podcast as much as I did. Enjoy. Welcome to the I Am Resilient podcast. Today I have on the podcast Sarah Lambert, who is an empath, yogi, dog mom, and is studying to become a registered therapeutic counselor in Victoria, BC. So being a highly sensitive person, resilience is an important part of her daily life, and she hopes to help foster this in other people through her work with clients, volunteering, and mental health advocacy. Her own resilience practices include mindfulness, journaling, social supports, and spending time in nature. Welcome to the podcast, Sarah. It is an honor to have you here today. I am so privileged to be able to hear your story and share this with other people.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very grateful to be here.
Wonderful. So I will dive right into the questions. So the first question is, what do you think makes people resilient?
I think what makes people resilient is largely about their mindset in terms of how they view challenges and their ability to overcome them. So if resilience is defined as the ability to adapt in the face of adversity, then that tells us two things. First, we know that we need to go through difficult things in order to develop mental fortitude. And second, the adaptation that we're talking about is occurring within the individual in response to the environment. So we need to focus on that which we can control within ourselves rather than trying to manipulate or blame what's going on around us. So I think one of the biggest lies that we tell ourselves is that nothing bad should ever happen to us. And the fact is that life is just full of challenges. So when we're going through a tragedy, instead of self-victimizing, we need to be in touch with what we need and be able to take the steps in order to give ourselves that. So this might be turning inwards and nurturing ourselves, or it might mean turning outwards and the focus is still on our needs, but we need to look for ways that we can enhance our skills or reach out for support. So what makes people resilient is ultimately embracing change and knowing how to be adaptable and seeing life's challenges as learning and growing opportunities.
Wow, I love your response, and you really emphasize the turning in and turning out. So it can't be
Mhm.
just one or the other, because I think the tendency is to want to do it all ourselves and then blame ourselves when we aren't resilient or we aren't able to face that challenge, or we look outside and perhaps support's not there, such as, during times of the pandemic and people being stuck at home. So I think being able to do both and balance both is so big. So wow, that is really powerful. I hope that people are taking notes. And Sarah, what are the greatest tools that you practice for your own resilience? So you mentioned mindfulness, journaling, social supports, nature. Do you have a specific ritual or routine, or how does this look for you?
Oh, that is a really good question. I think it does fluctuate over time how I access all of those different tools. The ultimate overarching theme for me is certainly mindfulness. I think all of those are ways that I get in touch with myself. It's really about tuning inwards.
Mm.
Um, and so for me, it's really that, yeah, training the brain and being able to recognize what I'm feeling, and then being able to take the steps to achieve those things.
Okay, mindfulness. And do you have a
Mhm.
specific mindfulness practice that you enjoy, or has it come sort of innately over time?
Well, I would say for me, the tipping point was really coming to my understanding of the difference between meditation and mindfulness. So I do have guided meditations that I do. That would be, so an example is rain meditation. You can just Google that. It's sort of a 4-step process to address, our emotional response to a situation. I do, breath work. I'll do sound meditations at bedtime to help me relax. And those are all really focusing my attention on a specific thing, whether it's my, what's going on in my mind or what's going on with my body. Whereas I think of mindfulness as that the interweaving of that into my daily life. So, I can be driving or I can be at work, and being able to notice how I'm responding to a situation is how I'm mindful and interweave that. But what I
Mm.
need is that focused meditation in order for me to integrate that into my daily practice.
Wow, okay. So it is sort of the balance of that intentional meditation, that intentional set of time, and then practicing it as you go through the day and you're faced with adversity.
Yeah, I think of it a lot like the analogy that I always give is it's going to the gym for our brains. So when you go to the gym and you do bicep curls, that to me is the same as a meditation. You're really focusing on building strength in that one area. So with the gym, it's in our bodies, and with mind or meditation rather, it's in our brains. And then when you take that to the gym, you need that arm strength in order to be able to do, your activities of daily living. That is just, lifting heavy things, or, going for a hike. It's kind of that strength is there when you need it.
I love that. And it almost requires that same sort of pushing through when you're at the gym and you're maybe having sore muscles or you're fatigued and you're forcing yourself to really work that. It almost takes the same type of strength. I don't know if it correlates to areas in the brain, but it takes that strength to commit to the meditation practice, I think.
I completely agree. There are days when we don't feel like going to the gym, and there are days when I don't feel like meditating.
Yeah.
And I know that I need to do that in order to keep myself in a healthy place. So, and then sometimes when we get there, right, I sit down on my mat and I'm distracted. I'm thinking about what I want to make for dinner, and I have to keep bringing myself back to, I'm taking this time for me right now, and recognizing the importance of that.
Yes, yeah. And especially if you're the type of person that wants to focus on others, sometimes your mind drifts to how can I be doing something for somebody else or something in my life, being a natural caregiver.
Absolutely.
So is there a story of resilience that you can share with other people or that others can learn from?
Absolutely. Well, my life has changed drastically over the last year, as I think everyone's has with the pandemic. So
Mm,
I think, I mean, that is a situation where we've been thrown into a collective need to adapt at multiple organizational levels. So I do see the pandemic as a resiliency building process in itself. And, everyone who comes out of it on the other side is going to be stronger for it. And unfortunately, not everyone is going to make it out the other side. My younger sister is an example of that. She died by suicide a year ago in June of 2020.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. My heart just, my heart just sinks. It really, really does.
Yeah. And it was unexpected, certainly, given her age. We don't anticipate our younger family members to go before we do. And it threw me and my entire family into the most intense grief I'll probably ever experience in my life. So it really forced me to strip down emotionally and dig deep into myself to find a way forward, and also to be there for my loved ones who are also really struggling. So
wow.
I'm very grateful for the resources that I have, that I had been cultivating this mindfulness practice up until that point. And we were really lucky that, the community came together to hold us up during that time as well.
Wow, that is, and thank you for being vulnerable and open to sharing, because I think that is so true about resilience. You said in the beginning, we know how resilient we are when we face adversity, and we only know the extent of our resilience up until, our stresses surpass them. And that's why it is so important to have these tools. And the tools, like you said, have to be systemic, and they have to be all encompassing, tuning in and tuning out, and looking inside and looking outside. And that is the heartbreaking thing about the pandemic, is we only see what we see, and everyone else is kind of separate to us. But we can read statistics and we can watch the news and see tragedy, but it affects everyone in such a different way. And resilience is something that is kind of become a buzzword these days. And it sounds so light when we say resilience, but we don't know true resilience until we need it, right?
Absolutely.
Wow,
resilience is obviously heavily tied to grief. It is one of the most difficult things that we'll have to overcome humans, but it is also a fact of life, because we might not be talking about losing a loved one. We can also be grieving, the loss of a former version of ourselves, or our own unmet expectations. There are daily phases of grief that we have to go through around lots of different types of situations. So it's not widely talked about, but it is a really heavy topic, and it's very prevalent.
Absolutely. That reminds me of this week was the filming of The Wisdom of Trauma. I don't know if you were able to tune in with Gabor Mate.
No, I haven't yet, but we'll have to check that out.
Yes, definitely check it out. And it talks about, trauma and types of healing that can happen, and how, if we don't reach for these resources, we can cover it up with other things, but we don't have that same healing. So
Absolutely.
Thank you. You are so strong, and you are such a light in this world. And the people who you will affect going forward, I know, will just be so lucky to have you around.
Well, thank you.
And I guess my next question is, when and how were you drawn to practice resilience? Did this come before facing adversity, or were you born, would you say you were born resilient, or?
I think I kind of stumbled upon it by accident. It was about 7 or 8 years ago when my sister was first diagnosed with her mental health condition, and things were really bad at home, that I was looking for better ways to support her. And that was ultimately, I ended up finding tools for myself. I was enrolled in this program called Family Connections, and it teaches communication skills for loved ones of someone with suffering from various personality disorders. And I went in there looking for solutions of how I could fix her. At that point, I really was turned outwards and looking to control the world around me. And ultimately, what I learned was that oftentimes we can't control situations. We can only control how we respond to them. So that was my introduction to mindfulness practice and moving more towards having that internal locus of control. And so I learned how to improve my self-care regimes and develop healthier boundaries and become a lot more conscious about how I was allocating my own energy. And the thing with, I think a lot of resilience tools is that it really is a preventative health program. And so the thing is, when we do preventative health well, it's often that nothing happens. Like it wasn't until some of these more difficult things started happening to me in the last few years that I looked back and I went, wow, if I was going through this 5 or 10 years ago, how I would be responding is vastly different.
Yes. Yeah. Wow. That is one thing that I think is challenging too for most people, because if it's not urgent, it gets brushed to the side.
Mm-hmm.
And preventative practices don't become urgent until there is a red flag often.
Absolutely.
Wow. That is, a big lesson for all of us to remember to do the little things too. And you mentioned boundaries, boundaries as self-care and boundaries as a resilience practice. And oftentimes I think people see boundaries as being selfish, but boundaries are necessary. And I think that's a big reminder. So the last question, Sarah, is what do you think the world needs to hear to be more resilient?
What does the world need to hear to be more resilient? Wow, that is a good question. I think the biggest thing is that we need to continue down the path of normalizing, talking about struggles, and just creating a culture in which people feel safe to ask for help. Individual resiliency is something that people need to take responsibility for in themselves, but a lot of the ways in which they develop that is through social supports in the form of having positive role models and behavior therapy programs and be able to go to retreats or accessing education. And if people don't feel safe to ask for help, then they're not going to be finding these resources in their communities.
Sarah, I want to say thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It has been a true pleasure to hear your story, to hear your experiences and learn about your tools and learn from your expertise on resilience. So Sarah will be launching a website soon, but until then, stay tuned and follow her on Instagram, because here she will be providing announcements for the next steps in her counseling practice, including drop-in, virtual, and in-person counseling. Her Instagram is The Conscious Counsellor. I will be tagging this in the show notes, and I will also be tagging the resources that Sarah shared. These include family connections and rain meditation. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the I Am Resilient podcast. If you would like to get involved with I Am Resilient, use the hashtag I Am Resilient to tag your stories, tools, and practices on your Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Until next time, may you be well.